that when I first got interested in our Tea Parties, watch your step here, Mike. I contacted TEAPAC for some training on how to deal with the Tea Parties and how to become an activist. And Mike and his TEAPAC just were wonderful in orienting myself and other Tea Party members on how to go about things and get active and contact people and do important things. And that's why we asked Mike to come here today. He's going to address the political situation in California because, you know, you think that things are just local. Nothing is local anymore. Our local elections are really national because there are national people involved. And Mike's going to tell you who those people are. Few of us realize that we can take the state back. And Mike has a program to get our message across. There's nothing wrong with our conservative message. The problem is that even if we win our arguments, we're not winning elections. So we need to win elections. So Mike's going to tell us how to do it. So if you wouldn't mind, Mike, come and tell us.
Thank you so much, Steve. Good to see you. By the way, I have instructions from Marcy to hand that to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
I'm going to sit, if you don't mind. I'm so tall, I'll loom over you, and I don't want to do that. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm delighted to be following this young lady, Heather. Let's examine, first of all, TEAPAC, for those of you who don't know, is a Tea Party organization based in Pasadena, California. We're the largest, probably the best organized Tea Party organization in the state. Our mission statement is like almost every other organization, and I think probably you guys would be committed to it as well, the notion of restoring limited constitutional government. That's what we're really focused on, and that means the constitutional issues and very much at the same time fiscal issues. They're not mutually exclusive by any means. The key for us, we add to that effective, continuous political action on the part of citizens. Our mantra is a little bit different than other folks. We acknowledge that there is a crisis of leadership, but the deeper, more challenging crisis is that of citizenship. It is still we the people, notwithstanding the very ominous message delivered by Heather and by so many other people. We are still the United States of America. We still have the electoral system. Yes, it's corrupted. Yes, it has been compromised. Yes, it's under assault. But we still have it, and by and large, our elected representatives continue to abide at least by the electoral system, which requires that they leave office. Our problem is a much larger one, and that is the reinterpretation of our Constitution, which has permitted our elected representatives to do things that we don't agree with. And that's a subject for another day. But let's talk today about practical political involvement. We've heard this this young lady here talk about all these terrible things. We hear them all the time. But when you turn the radio off and you shut down the video link, now we're back to, okay, what are we going to do? And a couple of folks here asked the perfectly reasonable question which is, how are we going to get these people that purport to represent us to do anything? And you know that they're not going to do a damn thing. Period. Okay. And so one of you asked, hey, is there a group of people? Do you have a list of people who do listen? All right, well, if they happen to be Mike Lee and for a couple of good Mormon guys like Jason Chaffetz, my son worked very closely with Jason in Washington. These are all good guys, and of course they listen to it. We have many good folks all across the country, even a few Democrats here and there. But at the end of the day, they do what they do. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it the Democrats, excuse me, not Democrats, but why does our government tap our phones? Why do they fool with our guns? Why do they try to shove Obamacare down our throat? And the answer is, because they can. All right, so far so good, we're with each other. Now why can they? Well, because they win elections. Now we have to probe beneath that. Exactly why do they win elections? And that's going to be the subject of my discussion here, and how we use the insights that we gain from answering that question to turn this situation around. And the first thing that we have to realize is, I think Dr. Steve made the point we've discussed many times before, that we do not have a persuasion problem. We're not losing arguments, we're losing elections. And I know that you could all point out the electoral results that suggest, and I emphasize suggest but do not prove, suggest that we're losing the argument. But as a matter of fact, when we look at the major issues in the United States and look at the polls out there, 70% of people agree with us. You have 70, let's just make it 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 Americans believe in our Second Amendment. 2 out of 3 Americans, soon to be 9.9 Americans out of 10, disagree with this whole Obamacare fiasco. And yet we have it. Why? You take a poll. Do you like being spied on by the federal government? And the answer is no. And so 2 or 3 or more out of 2 out of 3 Americans are going to say, no, I don't like those things. So we spend far too much time talking among conservatives, libertarians, Tea Party folks, whatever you call us. And by the way, there are a lot of liberals on the left-hand side of the dial that we've been able to count on in privacy issues and certain government flawed exercises of government power. There's a lot of Americans ready to line up with each other. So one of the first things we have to do, however, is to understand how elections work. And so as I discuss this, I would invite you to put aside all of your ideology. I'd like you to put aside everything that you think you know about politics for a moment. Leave aside the sophistication or the pseudo-sophistication or the presumed knowledge that you have from reading the newspapers and so forth, and walk with me. Just take a little walk down this path here. And what I'll do with you here this morning is what the United States did in the late 70s and the early 1980s. And that is to use organizational and economic analysis to understand our enemy. When we look over at the Soviet Union, our best insights came by leaving aside our ideological objections to the Soviet Union, leaving aside our fears of the Soviet Union, and just looking at them economically. And what we found at that time was that the Soviet Union was an empire that was greatly overextended. It wasn't nearly as fearsome as people thought. They had a very, very expensive empire to run, and it was tottering on the brink of collapse. And sure enough, by the first part of the 1980s, Ronald Reagan and the United States rebuilt the American defense apparatus, just merely threatened the Soviets with Star Wars, and they knew there was a war that they couldn't win. And within a few short years, the Soviet Union collapsed. But let us understand, unless you think I'm a special pleader here for Ronald Reagan, let's understand that no president, no country could have toppled the Soviet Empire all on its own, coming from a negative defense situation, going over a positive. Nobody could have done it in 8 years. Bottom line, insight, test point for the examination is the Soviet Union was rotting away for a long, long time. But for a lot of reasons, a lot of people were heavily invested in seeing the Soviet Union as some type of a great invincible monster. And that was not, and that included a whole lot of people in the military-industrial complex who were very invested in seeing it. A lot of others of us were just afraid. But it turns out that the Soviet Union couldn't maintain it, and sure enough, within a few short months after Ronald Reagan leaving office, his vice president, George Bush I, was president when the Berlin Wall came down, and that's where we've been living. I suggest to you that the far left, Union, Democrat, industrial complex is on the order of the Soviet Union, and that it has, and I ask you again to leave ideology aside, okay? I'm not seeing a communist under every chair. Just leave it aside as we apply intelligence and military and organizational techniques to the analysis of this problem. When we look at them, we see that we have a plan, an empire that's vast. There's not one single one of you here in this room who would suggest for a moment that the status quo is sustainable. In fact, the most frequently used and or abused term is by those who say, my God, this is unsustainable. Well, listen to yourselves. If it's unsustainable, it is, in fact, unsustainable. They can't keep this thing going forever, and look at all the hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars that they've had to crank through the system to keep the political strength in place that they have. And this team of geniuses with complete control of the media, complete daily control of the school system, complete control of academia. You go right down the list. Hundreds of thousands, millions of political operatives at work in every school and bureaucracy and bureau within the United States. And those geniuses barely broke 50% in the last election with everything going for them. Now, if you and I had anybody working for us and we gave those kinds of resources in business and they came up that short, well, that guy would be fired, or that gal, whoever was running. You see what I mean? They barely win the argument. Here in the United States, they're not winning the argument. They're barely winning elections. They had to steal the last one, too, through voter suppression. And the only thing that is, by the way, the big lesson that we need to draw from the political surveillance that happened during the election is not just that they stole the election. No surprise there. That's what Democrats do, right? That's how the other side operates. That should have been no surprise to us. Karl Rove, wherever you are, right? They were always going to do it, weren't they? What would you think that if you hired a store manager in a high traffic area, he had no surveillance cameras and no security in his store? You'd fire him. Why? Because, hey, pal, you should know that people steal from us, right? All right, well, okay, Karl Rove, I'll revisit him many more times in this presentation, because this guy wants us to focus on branding, as if we were losing elections, as if we were losing arguments. No, 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 no. We are who we are. They're not going to quit saying those things about us. They already know those things are untrue. We will spend no time trying to rebrand ourselves. That's a failed exercise. What we have to do is get busy and learn how to win elections. Let's go further. Why is it that, what is the structure of the left? What is the structure of this Democrat union industrial complex that we're looking at? What it is a union, no pun intended, a combination, as it were, of the far left, of the unions. The far left supplies the ideology. The unions supply the daily management of the Democrat Party, the money, the management, and the manpower, and then the crony capitalist industrial complex supplies even more money to it, plus the veneer of legitimacy, the implication that somehow there's something legitimate about this enterprise, when in fact they're just a group of people that profit from the growth of government. When we look back at the late 1960s, there's a lot of people in here who were as young as I was in 1968. We remember Chicago. We remember Lyndon Johnson quitting under pressure from the left. And we know how the Democrat Party was realigned. So was the Republican Party that same year with Nixon. But the most important realignment was there in the Democrat Party. And after that, the far left ran the ideology of the Democrat Party. We've never really looked back. They've been enormously influential in this state. But what we don't realize often is what happened with the unions. As the United States began to deindustrialize, and a part of the jobs moved out of the United States, out of the industrialized Northeast, and the other half, so to speak, moved to the non-union South. From that point on, the unions recognized that they were going to have to expand their business in an entirely different area, and that meant government. From then on, they were going to focus their efforts on unionizing public employees at the state, the federal, and the local level. Once again, no ideology. How many people are union members? Say, I'll raise my hand because I am. I'm a member of SAG. Right? Okay. So no union members, or at least not willing to admit it in this company. All right. But again, we left our passion and our prejudices at the door. We're trying to look at this logically, organizationally, economically. They began to grow their business by growing government. And after 1968, certainly after 1972, from then on, there would be a 1-to-1 ratio between the growth of government and the growth of unions. Now that's a test point. Let me repeat it, because I want you guys to understand this when you wake up tomorrow morning and you're doing your push-ups or you're drinking your first cup of coffee. Remember this: there is a 1-to-1 relationship between the growth of government and the growth of unions. You can't have one without the other, just like the Frank Sinatra song. A 1-to-1 relationship, and it's that insight that I came to last year that lays the foundation for everything that we do, because it is that electoral apparatus that is in place and operating 24/7 that we have trouble coping with. So let's compare Democrats and the unions and the left. Let's compare our political opponents with ourselves and how they operate functionally. Over on their side, they're professional. People get paid day in and day out, each and every day. They engage in political operation. One thing that the lovely Miss Heather failed to mention is how deeply involved in the IRS unions are. All right? You watch for the story coming out about that. All right? I won't say any more, but you just watch the story coming out about union influence inside of the IRS and how deeply involved they are, and how big a part of the political agenda is executed there and not necessarily at the White House. Okay, there's a lot to be said about that. You'll see a lot of it coming out here over the next several weeks. Now, that is where these folks operate. The unions are, and this is their great virtue, they are local. They're not national. They're local. We call the basic union infrastructure, we refer to them as locals. That's where they start. And these people are baptized into political action. They're used to going into hostile atmospheres, taking their argument, their product, identifying dissatisfaction or creating it, as the case may be. They are experts in organization. That's what they do. And all of this then is retained, and it's put into a full-time political operation, and then that is grafted on to the electoral apparatus. Why? Because that 1-to-1 ratio. Because the only way for them to expand their business is to expand government. The only way to expand government is to elect people friendly to them. It's just business. It's just business. For the unions, it's just business. For the far left, of course, it's ideology. For the unions, they don't care what the outcome is. They just want to increase their numbers. And if suddenly we were to have an outbreak of manufacturing in this country, they'd be happy to support that as well if it meant an opportunity to increase their membership. Now, this is not a Jeremiah against unions. We all have a right to organize. That's clear. What we're talking about here is the political influence that they have. But let's compare what they do with what we do. And it's the difference between the Wehrmacht and a bunch of little old ladies and children with pitchforks and slingshots going up against them. Conservatives, Republicans, they come out of their coffins once every couple of years and decide that they're going to go ahead and get involved in an election. I know I was involved here over the last 4+ years in doing exactly that, and we know that doesn't work, right? Because we're going up against a 24/7 all-weather apparatus. It's in place and it's operating even now as we speak. There are people that are on their payroll. But over on the conservative side, they're not structured for victory. On the left, on the unions, they are structured for victory. They decide who they're going to run. They decide when they're going to run. They pick them from the local level and they move them on up. Judy Chu out in the East Valley. That's how deep her roots is in this whole union. These people are identified and moved up through the local offices all the way to the top. We on the conservative side, of course, have no plan to do it. As a result, here in the state of California, and I'm going to shorten my presentation a bit here to fit the time that I have available here, but as a result here in California, we come to the next test point for you to remember, and that is for the immediate future, due to the effects of gerrymandering, California Republicans and conservatives will not be able to take control of the legislature or even to achieve a working minority such that we might be able to influence the whack jobs on the other side to try to get some policies that would work here in the state of California. That's just not going to happen. And because of that, TEAPAC for itself is no longer a candidate-centric operation. I didn't say that we avoid candidates. Don't come up to me afterwards and say, Mike, how come you're not supporting candidates? I didn't say that. I said we were no longer a candidate-centric organization. That is, our political activity is no longer organized around that. Number 3, because of what we've learned, because of lesson number 1, the one-to-one relationship between the growth of unions and the growth of government, and so TEAPAC will not undertake any course of political action that does not have as its chief objective the destruction of union political influence in the state of California. Again, I didn't say unions, I said this uniquely corrupt, lethal brand of political influence. That's the enemy. They are the enemy. They are the problem. They are the people who, for the sake of expanding their own business interests, support the most destructive far-left political agenda in the history of this world. And it is that political support, that political apparatus here, that creates the support that flows up through the state of California and is responsible for Mr. Obama. Political power, especially on the left, aggregates at the bottom and flows up to the top, where money and privilege and patronage flows back down through the system so they can distribute it at the local level and go after it. So, you heard me say local. Is there any chance of getting any water, Dr. Steve?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll get it.
All right, great. That local power comes back down, and that's where it's exercised. That's where they continue to recruit. That is where the jobs are given out. Remember, TARP, the first stimulus, overwhelmingly, that money went not to shovel-ready projects. That went back into the local governments. That was the patronage. That was the payoff. That's what they got for delivering the election in 08. That laid the foundation for, guess what? 2012. They were thinking ahead. And do you think that everything that they're doing now is not somehow gauged to 2016 and the election of you-know-who? That's exactly what's going on. It's in place. But from that, from this kind of rigorous organizational and economic and political analysis, we concluded that we had to do something very, very different. We'd move away from the candidates, but we also realized that we still had something very powerful here in the state of California. We still had the initiative process, both the local and the statewide initiative process. And we concluded reasonably that thank you so much. Appreciate that. We concluded that here in the state of California, we could use the initiative process very effectively, and that we would do that principally to get rid of taxes, both at the local and ultimately at the state level. Because we concluded also that, guess what? The only way to make government smaller is to make government smaller. And when you listen to this charming young lady up here, as well informed, as articulate, as passionate, as patriotic, and as well informed as she is, does she have a plan for fixing this? No. All she did was to give us the letters to tyrants program, the faxes and email to tyrants program, protests. Oh, I got an idea for you, and I'm not mocking her, but really, call-in telephone talk show hosts? Is that a plan for Americans with the kind of oppression that we're looking at? That ain't gonna make it, forgive my bad grammar. That's just mindless nonsense. And we confronted that fact too, because despite all of our great efforts, Steve, over here over the last 4 to 5 years, fact is the Tea Party doesn't matter a damn in this country. Yeah, we elected a working majority in Congress, but what the hell has that gotten us? Who's the enemy? I'll tell you who the enemy is. It's that gutless wonder, John Boehner. We have as many problems in the Republican side. So we conservatives are going to have to take another form of action. So at the local level, what we've done here is very simple. We're going after taxes, starting with the utility tax. Now, let me tell you something exciting that probably most of you don't, at least a bunch of you aren't going to know, because I didn't know this until I started applying myself seriously to it about 6 months ago. But here in the state of California, under the authority of Proposition, 216, or 218, passed back in 1996, it only takes 5%, valid signatures from 5% of the number of people who voted for governor in the last election to put any tax, fee, assessment, or charge on the ballot for what? Reaffirmation, repeal, amendment, get rid of it, reduce it, whatever you want to do. 5%. I don't, somebody told me what the number for Santa Monica is, but it wouldn't be very many. In a city like Pasadena, which is approximately the same size as, how many people you got here, Santa Monica? A couple 100,000?
No.
100? Yeah, a small city basically, not that large. So, in Pasadena, we've got a little bit more than that, maybe about 150. And over there, all it takes is fewer than 2,500 signatures to put the utility tax on the ballot over there. That's all it takes. In the city of South Pasadena, their city collects $3.6 million a year in taxes off of the utility tax, and that's 10% of their $36 million in revenues, not counting their pass-throughs from the state, from the federal. Now that's 10% off of that $36 million. Now let's go back to lesson 1. Remember that 1-to-1 ratio. What do? We're reducing the size of government. When we reduce the size of government, we reduce the size of the unions. And when we reduce the size of the unions, we reduce their political impact. And it is the accumulation of those political results at the local level that provides their foundation and ends up providing the political power at the federal and of course in the congressional level that lets Miss Maxine Waters blow you off. Right? Just completely ignore you. That's it. Oh, well, maybe, Heather says, maybe if you call up and you talk real nice. Don't scream. Just talk. The Talk Nice to Tyrants program. Please tell me you're serious. Right? This is madness. This is like talking nice to gangbangers and hoping they won't steal your car. It's just not going to happen. So, this is the point we do this. Now, I'm happy to report to you that we have at least 5 cities have signed up, and there's another 5 cities in progress right now. City of South Pasadena will be sponsoring its tax rollback. City of South Pasadena, Arcadia, Newport Beach going after their dock tax down there. West Covina is pursuing another kind of initiative. We have another 6 cities that we're meeting with, including, guess what, the city of Bell. Right. Right, no surprise there. They're the most tax
Maybe
people.
somebody will vote now.
Oh, yeah. So we had this Mexican-American gal, Nora, heard about us and tracked us down, which is good, because that's where I grew up, was over there, Huntington Park, Belle Maywood. I've told people for years that we won't have any trouble talking with Latino folks. We just need to get over there and talk not about party, but talk about issues. Have conversations with people that mean things to them. And this is how we lay the foundation. Now, what's important about this? I already hear somebody saying, hey, Mike, if we get rid of the utility tax, a few more taxes here in the People's Republic of Santa Monica, okay, there's two pebbles off of the mountain. We have two bigger problems, you know. How about the state of California? And to which I replied, thank you for asking that question. How about the state of California? It only takes 5% of the number of people who voted for governor in the last election, not registration, the number of people who voted for governor, to put taxes or any other major statutory change in California. 8% if you're trying to amend the Constitution. So somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million signatures is what you need to put a new law on the books in the state of California, or the larger number if you're amending the Constitution. But now, how do you do that? Answer, with a lot of effort. But we anticipated that, and so when we go into the neighborhoods, folks who ask the same question that I heard you thinking here just a few minutes ago, I tell them, look, come together, unite around and organize to get rid of a local tax. Find any tax and kill it. For God's sake, can we Republicans and conservatives and libertarians, can we just find one single doggone tax and get rid of it? Can we make government just one little bit smaller right here? Isn't that worthwhile? Can't we organize together around that simple, concrete, effective political action? And the answer is yes. And when we do that, the first byproduct is organization. And now, when we come together, at least in TEAPAC, where we're going through and retraining our organization and re-recruiting, all of our people are recruited and selected for one reason only, because they're trigger pullers. They're people who are going to go out and get signatures and get rid of local taxes. They will stand by to stay organized and to work, connect, network with other organizations like you folks in your city out here, who will then get rid of taxes in your neighborhood, and then together we will work to get the signatures that we need to put statewide ballots that truly are significant on there. Things like school choice, right to work, maybe another version of Prop 32, caps on welfare, voter photo ID. There's any number of things that we could put on there, and all of them are designed to reduce taxes, number one. But number two, and most importantly, is to make them spend it all. So let's go back to the first part of the lecture. What was the most important, ultimately the most effective thing that Ronald Reagan did? He told them he was going to make them spend all their money. All right? Only Ronald Reagan, all he had to do was threaten Star Wars and put a few million in there and get some guys in white coats running around on it. We actually did develop large parts of it contrary to suggestions to the contrary. We're seeing a lot of it nowadays with our different ships and intercepts and so forth. But the mere threat of it was enough to shut them down. They knew they couldn't keep up. Now imagine if Ronald Reagan had actually put them to the proof and actually started doing it. Well, we conservatives did that. Proposition 32, which was the union buster that brought campaign reform to the unions. There you go. Those guys went berserk. Conservatives spent $5 million. Anybody know how much they spent to defeat Proposition 32? $75 million. Right. It's probably more than that if you count up the other money the private organizations spent. Now in the Marine Corps, we have a name for that. We call it combat efficiency. All right? So, you know, if we lose 5 and we kill 75, guess what? We send up 10 or 20 planes tomorrow and finish them off, right? It's a good trade. And so, hang on, all right? There'll be Q&A afterwards there. And so, if one of our major goals is to put the resources under stress, and we on the conservative side and the Republican side we don't put any money into the race against Maxine Waters. So we got this wonderful conservative guy. Do you think that anybody is really going to give that man the money that he needs to go out there and fight Maxine Waters? And the answer is no. It's just not going to happen. So in other words, and this gets back to what I said. Democrat, left, far left, the industrial complex cooperating with them, those guys are structured for victory. They plan it from beginning to end. We on this side, we have no plan. In fact, we tell them where we're not going to be, right? We tell them where we're not going to be so they get to concentrate their forces, right? This is, I mean, all you have to do is listen to Karl Rove. He'll tell you where he's not going to fight. And now that guy, that jerk, was out here, I didn't go to it, but that guy was up here giving Republicans a lecture at the convention about how we had to learn how to fight to rebuild our party right here in California, just like they did in Texas and so forth. We have to get organized and have to start collecting money. This from a man who did not compete in California in 2000, didn't put a nickel in here, didn't do anything in 04, didn't do anything in 08, didn't do anything in 12, and he comes out here and lectures us. All the while, they hijacked the California conservative Republican money train that left California with over $100 million in every election cycle to go someplace else. So we don't spend money on politics in this, on the conservative side. We just really don't. The money that gets spent gets sent elsewhere. You see what I mean? So I ask you again, everything that you think you know about the situation, put it aside. There's a high degree of probability that it's just wrong. And so, by and large, when we measure the political results here in the state of California, we're measuring doing nothing versus an organization that does almost everything. We're looking at what happens when you invest few or no resources versus an organization that aggregates and expends virtually unlimited resources. But we don't have to do that. What we can do is to shut them down, and I propose to attack these people to get us, make them spend money in 50 or more places. And the most valuable outcome for this program here, for us in TEAPAC and in conservative politics, is that for the first time we are on offense. And offense is what suits me. My training is not defensive. We are constantly looking for ways to be on offense, and now we can hit them anytime, we can hit them anywhere, and we do anything to them that we want, and they're going to have to defend that because remember, go back to the first part of our analysis, they are the old Soviet Union. They are a vast empire stretched out over tens of thousands of miles and 25 time zones, whatever it is that the Soviet Union was spread out. It's hard just to talk with people during daylight hours at the other end of that empire, and it requires vast resources. They can't do it. And if these guys were that good, if it were that hard, they couldn't do it. And look what, even with unlimited resources, truly unlimited resources, with no restriction on the amount of your money and your property and your liberty at their disposal, they barely broke 50%. And if you look at some reasons, some of the data is because guys that look like me didn't show up to vote because they got spoiled and got their knickers in a knot and decided that they were going to punish the Republican Party. All they did was to punish you and me by not going to the polls. So what can you guys do here? I urge you to do anything. Find a tax and kill it. If you want to know how to do this process at the local level, we'll help you. We'll show you how to get involved. We'll work with anybody from any city. We have people from all over Southern California. that are coming online right now. John Eastman, anybody know John? Okay, great. John Eastman is at the the head of our legal committee, helping us to review all of these things. I'm going to invite my old friend and classmate, law school classmate Dan Lundgren, to join our legal team. He's former Attorney General for the state of California. And we'll get a couple of other folks as well. Yeah, we can do something. We're up against a lot, but really, ladies and gentlemen, we just have to take their money away, and we're going to have to do. We are in worse shape now, as we realize it, in the last 6 months than we were in any period of time in our country. We have more that we're up against now, and I think it's going to be harder for us to turn it around than it was even for our founding fathers. We're hoping that we can do it without any violence. The rule of law, constitutional transition of power, that's what we fought the first revolution for. We've fought many times in other places to preserve the idea of constitutional government, of the civil change of power. But we're dealing with a government apparatus that has gone off of the constitutional map, and increasingly we Americans no longer have a constitution in the most fundamental sense, that we have an agreement among ourselves as to what the rules are. And that's worse than a Supreme Court going off of the map and misinterpreting the document. We don't have a shared, as Americans, we no longer have a shared understanding as to what that document ought to mean, regardless of what these 9 men and women in robes have to say. We don't agree on it. So we're back to the first phase of our American Revolution again. But that ought not to surprise us or to dismay us, because this was ever so. Our first revolution was fought with the support of about 1/3 of Americans. 1/3 were loyalists, they were royalists, monarchists, and so forth, and by the way, had a lot of tradition and good arguments to support their position. And the other third, of course, were the moderates. We all know who they are. You know, they were men and women of great reason and restraint. Yes, looking for which way the wind was going to blow. Totally. They risked nothing. They invested nothing. Just waited to see which way it was going to go. And yeah, I'm on that side. So we're no different shape than our founding fathers, and they would not be surprised in the least that we're in the situation that we are. They would be dismayed. They would be sad. But I don't think that you would tell these men that they were surprised, because they knew then that we were the exception to history. We still are, in the fight between tyranny and liberty, between despotism and so forth, remains the same. So I'm delighted to be here today with you guys to wage this battle anew. I can see my moderator advancing on me on the right. So. I'm at your disposal.
Let's all thank Mike. That was a wonderful presentation. I just wanted to make sure we had enough time for Q&A.
Sure, and I'll stay for anybody who wants to talk.
So would you like to just recognize people?
Sure,
and take it
why not? The lady in the front, she was jabbing at me.
I'm sorry.
How are you? What's your name, ma'am?
My name is Patrice.
Glad to meet you.
Thank you for speaking.
Yeah.
In our state, we are a little disgusted with the initiative process, because every time you vote something in, the courts overturn it. And I'm thinking of I think it was 168. It won decisively. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was great, and it won, and it got overturned. How can we get around that this time? Because this is going to be the same issue, isn't it? Because our courts, kids coming up in our universities as judges and lawyers are being groomed with this influence in our cultural institutions. It's Marxism, excuse me for being so political, but I mean they're being taught to hate our Constitution, and it's a living, breathing document.
I know your question. The question is, is one of despair, battered conservative syndrome. Right. We talked about that the last time I was here. I won't go back into it. But I run into this all the time. And what they've done is to condition you to defeat yourself and to censure yourself, just like a battered wife. So a battered wife doesn't pick up the phone to call the cops, says he'll find out about it, and he'll beat the feathers out of me. if he finds out. So don't do that. Take action anyway. And by the way, if they have to file lawsuits, let's make them file 50 of them. All right? So remember, back to lesson 1. This is why I gave the class. There's a test at the end of the class. So, so we measure our political action along a continuum of victory and good outcomes. So when we press them, when you get that, they're going to have to reallocate political energy. We're going to change the topic in the People's Republic of Santa Monica to more taxes versus fewer taxes, right? More government versus less government. So don't argue with me. Just listen. Hang on. Listen. I'm trying to tell you because I've had all these arguments. So the first thing we do, we win because we fight. Number one, and they're going to have to spend resources. And if you do it in Santa Monica, and I've got 50 or 100 other places in this state, these guys are going to be busy. They got too much time on their hands, right? Number two, if you're taking back taxes, that's not like saying that we're going to take welfare money away from illegal aliens. Where there might be a constitutional argument. You've either repealed the tax or you haven't. You see what I mean? And if the left is going to advance to that position, then we're making the point. Then it's time that everybody learn that the courts are willing to take out of our hands the very power of taxation. Now you're changing the argument. Stamp Act, okay? We need to know where these people stand before we just give up. Okay. Next question. Yes, ma'am. Then we'll work.
What did the Supreme Court just do to the proposition and initiative process by states?
Nothing. What happened was, and I really don't want to spend too much time on this because it has to do with it will contribute to your sense of discouragement. Okay, but what we had was Jerry Brown just failed to defend it. He broke his oath to uphold the law, refused to defend it. The courts at the trial level let the proponents, let a non-government person represent the state. Well, they didn't have standing. I think that this could be solved. I've said, John Eastman and I have discussed putting into each proposition that we have other language which is severable. Lawyers know what that word means. In fact, any of you work in contracts will see severable in there, authorizing the proponents to act as special attorneys general in that case. But that was all. It didn't do any. In fact, if anything, it probably upheld California law. It was probably a good decision. There was a question here. Was it Brooks?
Oh. Duncan.
Duncan, yeah.
Your tactical and strategic points are well taken. I have no argument with them at all. What I would challenge you on, though, is making the claim that the ideological war is not really the problem, and we may or may not have lost the last election. You say that we didn't. But why not keep... I think we are gradually losing the ideological war because positions that people have now, you and I are old enough to know 20, 30 years ago, nobody would have dreamt of supporting those positions, and now they're becoming mainstream. Yes. Politicians are going around and identifying themselves as socialists, which would have been undreamt of decades ago. Right. So I think, and you dismissed it, but I think calling into talk radio shows where people get exposed to, and they get the message out, and they keep hearing alternate points of view from the propaganda in schools and the mainstream media is crucially valuable, along with the strategies.
Right, that's not really what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is but I may have left that impression. So let me clarify. Argument, what we used to call political intercourse, which I think is a wonderful phrase. Political intercourse in a democracy is extremely important. We have to continue to have that dialogue. But it also takes place in an electoral context. So these arguments, these ideological arguments, are not settled by political discourse. They are settled by governmental fiat. because of a perversion of the electoral process. So one way or the other, we have to concentrate on retaking the government apparatus, if only because of the claims that have been made for the power of that apparatus. That apparatus has been granted power and sway and influence, a domain of power that is completely inconsistent with ours, and we have to capture it, if only to delimit it once again and put it back in its box. But first we're going to have to take back the electoral. That's why you have to emphasize the electoral part. Yes, ma'am.
I was a little taken aback. I don't know if I've been asleep. I was living outside the country for a couple of years and just got back a little over a year ago. In the last election, when we went through the primary process and then ended up in a general election with two candidates from the same party as your only choice, it baffled me how that even came about, how it was allowed to come about. How do you not have an election that actually is an election and not just a referendum?
Well, the short answer is Charlie Munger the Younger, okay? You know, he put up some money. This was another man with too much time and too much money on his hands, who came up with some ivory tower vision of making the legislature more competitive in these districts. I won't bother outlining his argument, but it happened. But let me suggest to you that that will probably get changed. But even more important than having, when you have two Democrats, or a Democrat and a Republican on a ballot, do you really have that much choice? A lot of libertarians here in this room, I know, and I was a registered libertarian for 30 years. But a lot of us will look at that, man, and hold our nose and say, man, there just isn't that much difference. That's why what you and I really want to get busy doing is making sure that every time there's a local or state election, there's always a real small government alternative on there. So let's us libertarians and conservatives and Democrats who believe in less government in a lot of areas, let us work together to make sure that there's a small government alternative on every ballot, an alternative to those guys. And then we'll get this apparatus. But what has to start working? For politics to work, we citizens must work first. We have to regain our sense of our citizenship and acquire the skills that we need to participate effectively in the political process. And that's really where my emphasis is, precisely because we believe passionately in those other things. Ma'am.
How do you feel that your tactics are fitting in with this barrage on Proposition 13 going on?
Oh, it is fantastic. We're going to make the subject lower taxes, not higher taxes.
That's my question to you.
Absolutely.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, see now, Prop 13, they're
because
trying
I've
to
been so
undermine it.
disturbed about that.
Less property taxes.
Yeah, how about less
theoretically.
property tax? How about
Even less.
we run an initiative in the county of Los Angeles to reduce property tax? Now, I can hear all the whining,
insane.
screaming,
Insane.
wailing, and gnashing of teeth. I can hear this biblical din out there.
Yeah.
Oh my God, our cities are, they're going to burn and this and that and everything else, and you're going to destroy the government, Mike. And I said, I could only wish,
Music.
but
Yeah, right.
I could only wish, but trust me, they have already done this. And I want you to pause with, stay with me. I know we've been here for a while, but I ask you to put aside so we can really understand. If there's one area where I have trouble, no matter how many times I say it, even to my lovely wife, lots of folks don't get it. Do you guys understand that this whole thing has already collapsed? Is there anybody in this room who can sit me down? Does anybody know anybody who can sit us down and walk us through it and show us how all this incredible amount of debt and government and taxation and regulation and all that doesn't have a really serious, devastating outcome? And it is that realization that drives us here today. So when people come to us and said, Mike, you got rid of our utility tax, and oh my God, people aren't going to eat and this and that, and you're going to destroy the government. Hey, you guys have already done that. We're trying to take the money away from you because we can't trust you with our Constitution. We can't trust you with our money. We can't trust you with the courts. We can't trust you with the truth. We can't trust you with our children. We can't trust you with a doggone thing. And so we're going to take the money away. We're going to take it all away. Then we're going to take out a clean sheet and we're going to start this discussion all over again. And what you do is you take the money away from these people. As long as they have our property, our liberty will be at stake. That's what they're after. You, sir.
Any thoughts on how you actually go about dismantling this regulatory apparatus? I mean, even if you defund, the structure's still there. How do you start taking that apart?
There are three distinct steps. First of all, organize. Okay, because we can't do anything if we're not organized. And we use the local initiative to accomplish that organization both at the local and the statewide level. Once we achieve what they call critical mass, there we have enough people who are reorganized. Now we have citizens working together throughout the state. Then we have the political muscle to really change it and to put on something to get rid of California cap and tax. You know, the AB, what was it, 32. Yeah, and that mess. Suppose we put a cap on overall government employment in the state. Yeah, in other words, you know, there's a lot that we can do. We need to experiment with it. The left never accepted any limitations on what they could do. And I suggest that the biggest thing that needs to change is your mind and your attitude. My mind, my attitude, and tell people, we're not going to put up with this. And I'm through arguing with you. We're going to take our money back. We're going to take our country back because the alternative is unthinkable. I just can't imagine my grandchildren growing up in this mess. No good will come of it. And by the way, the rest of the world is with us, including most of Western Europe. Don't believe it for a second. Yes, ma'am. And then Robin, go ahead.
Okay,
Robin.
I'm just curious how this, what Brown put in a week or so ago with illegals watching our election process.
Sure.
I mean, that's our final, you know, our vote is what matters and what you're leading up to, and now the corruption, the purity of
they
our
weren't.
elections.
I'm not sure what they said about illegals, but it was at least non-citizens. To be precise.
Okay.
But the question is, who's monitoring them? It's the citizens. It's the regular. It's Jerry Brown who's the big problem.
Yeah.
So once again, you know, they want to pit neighbor against neighbor. And Juan or Juanita Gonzalez there, who happens to be a legal resident, is not necessarily the problem. We work with a lot of folks just like that, right? I've got permanent residents who contribute all the time to Tea Party and believe 100% with us. So they've shifted grounds, and what they're trying to do, of course, is to demonize any effort to control the electoral process, and they're corrupting it. And what that means is that they can put their special people there. They want to control it. There was another question back here somewhere. Maybe you guys are getting ready for lunch. That was the same. So yes, ma'am. One last question.
It was just in regards to the question of the Prop 13 issue. Again, what really haunts us, I believe, is this potential. We see now the potential use of the courts. And I mean, the support of Jerry Brown over the last issue, you know, and this is where I just think see Prop 13 sort of.
Oh, it's under attack. It's under attack. Now the question is, ma'am, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to call talk radio? Are you going to get busy attacking these people and take the damn money away from them? Okay, you see what I mean? And we have to get busy. You have to get busy.
Reversing it.
I mean, you're just saying, even if the courts overturn it, we just have to barrel through. Is that
Make
right?
them
Absolutely. Make them pay a price.
Okay.
Let the courts, let those guys in drag downtown Los Angeles, let them tell those Mexican folks in Bell that they've got no choice but to continue to pay expropriative taxes. Let King George tell them that. Okay? Yeah, let's put them in a box. I said that was the last question. I'll stay. Steve, and
We'll take
I'll visit
we'll
with.
make one
Okay,
last.
all right, good. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my concern is that there are so many people dependent on the programs that those taxes feed
Let me
into.
tell you about those people, okay? You say, can my anti-tax message win? Many people say, Mike, how are you going to get those Democrats to vote for you? And I remind you that Barack Obama got elected twice running against taxes. Whoa, you say. That guy's raising our taxes. He's taxing the hell out of us. I said that he ran on getting rid of taxes, and the people who voted for him didn't want to pay any taxes. They didn't vote for him because they hated white people. They didn't vote for him because they hate gringos. They didn't vote for him because he hates rich people. They voted for him because when he said they weren't going to add to their misery, their conversation stopped. They turned off yes on Obama. No, lowering taxes is the best, most successful message in American politics, and all we have to do is go down into the barrio, go down into the ghetto, and show them where they're paying taxes, and they'll vote against them. Now, the good news is, of course, that money comes right out of my enemy's pocket. Now I'm winning.
Yeah.
Okay, it's called win-win, and I made a friend without trying to make him a Republican. Dr. Steve.
I want to say one last thing. First of all, I want to thank you very much for coming here and delivering this message. We passed around a sign-in sheet, good, for Mike Alexander and TEAPAC.
Thank you.
And of course, I'll be talking to you about Santa Monica and what we can do. And I'd like as many of you who can do things to do things. But I just want to tell you, this is an exciting program. You can call talk radio, please do. I want to hear you. I listen to talk radio.
Me too.
But, and I listen to all those people. But I want to tell you one last thing. I listened to a speech the other day by Ted Cruz, Senator of Texas, his father, who was senator. And in the speech, he said, he was there when Fidel Castro took over Cuba. And in a speech, with millions, the crowds, and so on, like Barack Obama in Washington, Fidel Castro said, I'm bringing you hope and change. I swear to you, I heard the father say it. Hope and change.
He did. There
So,
Hey, we're going to work on getting Ted Cruz out here, and hope you guys will join with us.
absolutely.
Extending an invitation to him, and we'll put a big group here for him. Like to get Rand Paul out here, and just point of privilege. How about that man who used to be the next president of the United States, Marco Rubio? How do you get the next president of the United States to commit political suicide?
Really?
Unbelievable.
Makes,
Unbelievable. I mean,
no
I'm just
sense at all.
stunned. Watch that. Thank you so
Mike,
much.
thank you.
All right.
Yeah.